Okay, well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and start. We have 16 people with us now, so the rest can catch up with us. Good morning from Daytona Beach. I am actually flying back up Sunday, Father's Day. I'll be back in the area for some time after that. Still going to do these via Zoom. We're not going to be getting together anytime soon in groups for classes. So any questions you have, you'll be able to talk to your managers, and then if they can't answer the question for you, then they will contact me and we'll discuss it. So I'll be around, actually be in the Tyson's office a little bit under the social guidelines that we have to follow. So we had a question or two of why did the offices close? Because we were an essential business. We were never designated an essential business. The only people who were designated essential business were retail that sold food and that type of stuff and certain services. We came under what they called the professional service category, which means you did not have to close down, but there was another executive order 53 that came from the governor that said, unless you were an essential personnel, which we were not designated essential personnel, then you weren't supposed to be coming out except for you can show houses, that type of stuff, but not go to an office. So the office's best practice to follow, since you couldn't come out and no more than 10 people could be congregated in any area, was to close the offices. We are now in phase 2 here in Northern Virginia, which means the offices could reopen under certain circumstances and precautions, and those are being taken. Don't let your guard down. It's still out there. Just because they said we're in phase 2 doesn't mean business as before. I was just hearing on the radio here, or actually TV a while ago, about the number of new cases in Florida, and the majority of cases are the people in the 20s, because they just think that once we're in phase 2, just go out and do whatever you want to do. So more than about 60% of the cases are now people under 30 in Florida, because people over 70 like me, we use a little bit better common sense, I guess. We're more susceptible. So a couple things I want to point out about the COVID-19 doing business. We're under Executive Order 65, which means the same rules we had before. It's just that in-person gatherings can now have up to 50 people, whereas before it was 10. So the 10 before basically were your support staff, the people that made our organization run. And thank you for coming in and doing what you were doing. Everything else said, if you could still telecommute, do your work by that way, continue to do it. And that hasn't changed, okay? Now, are you allowed to hold open houses? A question I still get, okay? And they were never prohibited. It was just not a best practice in the industry, and was recommended that you not do it. But if you're going to do an open house, okay, before holding or attending an open house, discuss the potential risk and benefits with your clients. If your clients wish you to hold an open house and you're willing to do so, then here are the steps required by phase 2. Ensure all individuals entering the open house wear appropriate face mask coverage. They have to wear a face mask. It is covered under this Order 65. If you're out in public, even though it's a person's house, you made it a public accommodation when you held it open. Provide clear communication and signage for physical distancing in areas where individuals may congregate, especially at the entrances. And this goes for the offices also. Limit the occupancy of physical spaces to ensure that adequate physical distancing may be maintained. It is still 6 feet, okay? Practice routine cleaning and disinfecting of high contact areas and hard surfaces every 2 hours. So if you're going to be holding an open house, every 2 hours, you need to be cleaning everything down. Provide a place for individuals to wash hands with soap and water, or provide alcohol-based hand sanitizers containing at least 60% alcohol. And this one is important to me anyway. Post signage at the entrance that states no one with a fever or symptoms of COVID-19 or known exposure to a COVID-19 case in prior 14 days is permitted to enter. I would post that at my open house and ask people before they come in. And as long as you're asking of everybody, it is not a discrimination, okay? It is common sense protection. I would do the same thing at any office space you have. I'd have that on the doors as a warning. Are the requirements that individuals wear face coverings still in place? Yes. When I fly back, United Airlines said if you won't wear your mask, you can't get on the plane. And if you take your mask off in the plane, you're going to be pretty much on their do not fly list. So I'm glad they're looking out for my interest. Okay. Turn this thing off. So everyone, you need to be wearing those face masks wherever you go. When you're meeting with clients, you have to wear a face mask. There are rules and regulations posted by our offices to enter. Please make sure you do follow all those. Okay. Any questions about COVID-19? I think we're pretty much getting used to the routine now. It's just making sure that we follow it is the big deal. Okay, I want to go over some forms today, and these are not forms that buyer and seller sign. These are forms to help facilitate our business and protect you and the company. Okay, and the first one, we looked at this one time before, I believe, but it is called information for making an offer optional. This is a form put out by NVAR, okay? It is form number NVAR K1385, okay? Came out April of 20. This information for making an offer. Complete this with your seller. When you take a listing, complete this with your seller. And it starts out, the form does not constitute a disclosure or shall not become part of any residential sales contract. The purpose of this form is to assist the co-op agent in putting together a good offer for you that will not require us to keep running back and forth with a bunch of counters. So if you have that form in front of you, it starts out with the seller's names, the way that this property is titled, and the way it should be on the sales contract. Preferred mailing address, fax, or email. This is paragraph 6 of your sales contract. Remember, for delivery, 6A is where everything has to go to be delivered to the seller to be delivered. And since property address is capitalized in this paragraph, if 6A is left blank, then everything goes to the property being sold. So as a listing agent, where do you want this stuff to be delivered? And then FIRPTA, that Foreign Investment Real Estate Property Tax, that's paragraph 14 of your sales contract. You've heard me say many times before in classes, you need to know what goes in paragraph 6. You need to know what goes in paragraph 14. So call the listing agent and ask. Well, if the listing agent has filled all this out, downloaded into the system, then you can do a clean contract right out of the chute, okay? So, and if you're not familiar with what FIRPTA is, if someone is not a licensed, is not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, then you probably everybody here. You will probably be faced with a tax situation at the table that you don't want to be involved in. Any property over $1 million, then that party would have to have withheld 15% of the sales price, and that can be a real problem at the end. 1031 tax-free exchange is covered. Property information, tax map, legal descriptions. I'm not going to go through all those, but if you already have all that loaded up here for your contract, then we're in good shape. Okay, so the one I do want to talk about once again, the parking spaces number. When you're filling out a contract or you listing agents, you need to contact the condo association to find out if this is owned by a deed, it's assigned, or is it a limited common element. The older condos, Arlington and Alexandria, in the old days, when you bought a condo, okay, you went ahead and then what you did is you paid for your condo and you had an option to buy the parking space. So each were delivered under a separate deed, okay? And if you didn't ask for that property by that separate deed, you may have a problem at settlement. Assigned is you have the right to use space 33. But where we're finding a big problem, these new limited common elements, okay? A limited common element. You don't have a deed to it. It says in the condo documents, you have the right to use this space because you purchased unit 1, 2, 3. But I don't have a car and I don't drive. So I said, and you need an extra space. So we just draft up a deed. That's easy enough to do. You pay me for it. We go up to the courthouse recruit and we record that on the system. Now you have a deed to the property. I sell my unit three years later. You're pulling into that space and somebody else is trying to pull in it also, the new purchaser of my unit. Well, who owns who has the right to the space? You with a deed or them because of the limited common element? Well, the limited common element has the right to it because I could never sell something I didn't own. I only had the right to use the space. This does not show up in a normal title search. You'd have to have the really, really top-notch title search to get that. So because since I created the deed that's not in that property's chain, it might not be discovered, and you don't want that big problem in the future, okay? Also covers lead-based paint and the utilities, all that information covered in this new form. And the conveyances on the second page of that form. These are all in alphabetical order. Alarm system. You've heard me say many times before, there should never be any blanks in a contract. So if it's an alarm system, yes or no. If there's no alarm system, check no. Okay, so these should all be done by the listing agent and made available for us. It has listing broker information because that is required by TRID, that all this information be on the bottom of a sales contract. And then other information, seller preferred timing, okay? Or seller request post occupancy, yes or no? Other settlement preferences or requests. So can the seller say you must use my title company? No, we've discussed that one many times. They can say we prefer. So if they prefer a title company is there. Okay. So, or seller preferred septic inspector or others. So under other, you may very well now have under other, you may very well put here showing instructions for COVID or all that type of stuff. So I like that form. It is something, it's not, you don't download it, print it, attach it to a sales contract. Just helps you understand all the different blanks of the sales contract so we get it done right first time. Any questions about that form at all? Okay. buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences. The next form I want to take a look at. Once again, this does not get attached to any sales contract. You're going to have your buyers sign this just so that you can show that you've gone over all this with them if they are asking you to pull anything out of a sales contract. Okay. So in a competitive market, several contract offers on one property. You're the buyer's agent. What are some of the things that you might adjust in a sales contract to get yours accepted? You guys can chime in if you want. What are some of the things you might pull out? I'm waiting for you. What are some of the things you might pull out of a sales contract? Be
Maybe
more competitive.
appraisal contingent.
Okay, so they may pull the appraisal contingency out. Okay, if they do, is that in their best interest?
No,
Not really, right? No, not absolutely not. And thank you for jumping in here. I was starting to feel lonely. What else?
Home inspection.
Okay, home inspection.
It
Absolutely.
can be for information purpose and financing or straight going for closing, but HOA you cannot do it, documents, right?
Correct. So these are some of the things we've been pulling out of sales contracts to make more competitive. However, those all should be in there. So when they pull those out, there's probably an adverse consequence for them pulling it out, possibly. So this form, I like it. It's a form that says, not part of the sales contract, but the property that we're talking about. In submitting an offer, certain contract provisions may be waived or not utilized, some of which are referenced below. Buyer's decision regarding these and other contract terms may lead to potentially adverse consequences, and that's in bold print. Broker can counsel on real estate matters, but buyer is advised to seek legal counsel and or other appropriate professional advice regarding such potentially adverse consequences. You guys know every time I get an email from somebody asking a question and I give my opinion, I always follow it up with, but make sure they understand we can't give legal advice. You know, we can give them our opinion, but they need to talk to an attorney to seek legal advice about items. So it says here, despite the risk of potentially adverse consequences, buyer elects to submit offers and ultimately ratify a purchase agreement for the property without the following: check all that apply. And I've had a form like this that I created, some time ago, that just simply said, above the objection of my buyer's agent, I have decided to remove the following potential adverse items from my contract, and they initialed the one. So here it talks about conventional FHA, VA, or USDA financing contingencies. That to me almost has to be a cash deal. Appraisal contingency, you cannot waive appraisal contingency on FHA, VA, or USDA financing. It is against the law to do that. So even if you did it in a contract, it would not be enforceable. If you get a contract that comes in on your listing and it has that they're waiving the appraisal contingency for FHA, VA, USDA, if the appraisal comes back low, they still have the right to get out. You can't contractually contract those things away. Okay. Home inspection contingency, radon, well water potability test. Man, if I have a family I'm moving in with a well, I want every test in the world on that well now, not just a coliform bacteria. Septic inspection, sale and settlement of the buyer's property contingency. Even though it's a hot market, if they have a house to sell and you use that contingencies and clauses addendums for NVAR, don't lie about having a property to sell, because you may have delays in settlement, etc. be careful about that. And what are some other things that might be pulled out from them? Whatever you put in there. My daughter is in the process of purchasing a home in Lake Tahoe, and luckily I found them a really good buyer's agent who is functioning as a buyer's agent and actually protecting their best interest, because every other agent said, well, in order to get a contract through, you got to do this, pull this, because it's still a hot market. And I said, absolutely not. So good thing they didn't, because they found all kinds of problems with the home inspection, some major stuff that has to be done. And the owner doesn't want to lose the contract, so they are actually taking care of this stuff for my daughter and her husband. Very good agent. I was very impressed with him when I spoke with him. And he did take the buyer's best interest at heart, and we were willing to pay him. I told him right up front, we're not cutting your commission. We're not asking for any money back. We want somebody that will truly represent us, because the money you can save us if something needs to be taken care of well outweighs any money that I would be giving back to or getting back from anybody. And he asked me about if I take a referral fee, and I said, let's use it for closing costs for the kids. So, buyer's agent does it right. Adverse consequences form if they're not going to listen to you. Anybody have any questions about that form or why you should be using it?
What is the form number?
The form number is K1308, NVAR K1308. And these should have been in the download for you, I believe. But
yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but otherwise,
okay.
This is you have to submit at the time of submitting offer, or you will explain this to the buyers?
This doesn't go with your offer. This is just something you go over with your buyer.
With the buyers, yeah. Okay.
And get them to sign that you've gone over the risk that if you pull this out of your contract, you could have this problem. Okay. So if you pull out the conventional appraisal, okay, and the appraisal comes in low, okay, they're still going to have to take the property at the higher price, because you waived the contingency. It said if it comes in lower, then the seller could lower the price to that and you go forward. So make sure they understand the consequences of pulling everything out. You pull out the home inspection contingency, right? And after they settle, they start finding all things wrong with the house. Now they want to come back and go after the agent, because you were my buyer's agent. You should have been looking out for my interest. And I've seen lawsuits like that already. Okay. So protect yourself. This just shows that you actually discussed this stuff with them. And you might be able to go over this form with them right up front in your initial consultation that, hey, we have this. You might want to pay attention to this, and especially under other, maybe POA, right? You can't waive POA, right? Property Owners Act or Condo Act, as someone said there. However, if you settle without receiving these documents, then you have waived the right to come back against anyone. So if you're willing to take that risk and not worry about receiving the documents, that's going to be back on you. Or now under other, you could also extend this review of these documents by an additional 4 days beginning July 1st. So remember, we have July 1st date. We have some stuff changing that we've discussed the last couple of weeks. Any other questions about it? So these forms are things that you just use with the buyers or sellers and not become part of the contract, but it protects you and the company to have it in the folder. I highly recommend them. Okay, I want to take a look at Form K0004, revised April of 20, listing agreement amendment form. If you are going to amend your listing agreement, exclusive right, exclusive agency, lease, whatever, you would use this form. This form modifies certain provisions that are specified below, but everything else remains in full force and effect. Now, the one that I want to pay attention to, withdrawn from the MLS. Okay. This does not mean because it shows up as withdrawn in the Bright MLS that you have the right to contact that owner, talk to that owner about marketing their property. This withdrawn from the MLS, there's still a listing agreement. The owner just didn't want it on the multiple listing system for whatever reason. So until that listing expires, that broker still has a listing. And if you contact that owner, you're going to be in violation of the code of ethics. Okay. So they changed this withdrawn because Bright MLS has a different definition of withdrawn than what the original form meant. So under the old days, we could have called with the withdrawn, but not anymore. So seller, landlord instructs broker to update property status in MLS to withdrawn, and does or does not instruct broker to market property as an office exclusive after withdrawal of the listing. So they could say, I want no more showings. COVID-19, I've had it. I've got all these people just coming into my house. None of them were serious about buying. So, withdraw my listing from the MLS, but if you can find somebody, you can still sell it. So you could go to a private listing at that point. A little different than that coming soon stuff we talked about. Now, if you want to be able to call, it should say in the system, canceled. Okay, listing canceled. So this listing amendment form, you can use it for different things. Withdrawn does not mean you no longer have the listing. It means you cannot contact that owner. Any questions about those? Good. Now, I don't normally like to read forms, but this next one, I highly, highly recommend you should be using with every buyer and every seller. It's Form K-1346. It's understanding your rights and responsibilities under the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. You need to be going over this stuff with them. This proves that you have done it. There is no place for a signature. What I do with this form is I ask each of the buyers, if I'm dealing with a buyer or the seller, to initial the bottom of each page to show that we have gone over this and discussed it. So let's take our time with this because it is the rights and responsibilities under the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. My disclaimer here, some of these things will be changing July 1st, okay? But the basics of this form will be the same. The Forms Committee will have to make some adjustments to it. I'll tell you what those are as we go through. So let's just take our time, take a look at this form. The Virginia Residential Disclosure Act, Code of Virginia, 55517, requires real estate licensees to inform their clients about the responsibilities of owners, sellers, and buyers under the Act. You have a duty to go over this with them. Whether or not you have in the past doesn't matter. What matters now is that I would use this form because our law did change to say they don't acknowledge that you talked about this. It says you have done this with them. So it doesn't say you have to use the form, but you have to go over this information in the form. Your agent is giving you this form to help you understand those rights and responsibilities. So when might you want to give this to them? Probably right up front when you start out. Give them a chance to understand what they're getting into in a POA or a condo so that they may decide they don't want to live in one of those, might want something else. The Act applies to the sale, exchange, installment sale, and I highlighted this one, lease with option of purchase of residential real property. I used to do quite a bit of those in the old days when market money was tight, whatever. We may go back to that someday. But this is 1 to 4 dwelling units. Does not apply to all transactions. You can read that list, but some of those transactions, certain court orders, transfer by foreclosure or in bankruptcy, between co-owners or spouses, or between parents and grandparents and their children or grandchildren, then this disclosures aren't necessary. They're exempt. Safest avenue is, if you don't know, just use all disclosures in every transaction. And the sales of new homes are exempt. They have their own disclosure form. The act requires the owner to give the buyer a form developed by the Virginia Real Estate Board called the Residential Property Disclosure Statement. I think everybody's pretty much familiar with that. That is the D4 residential form. I don't know if I included that in your package today, but you should be familiar with that. Now, let's talk about that form. All the changes we discussed last week and the week before go into effect July 1st when it comes to the Virginia Disclosure Act, POA Act. So if you have a listing now and the seller has filled out the old disclosure form, the one we currently have, and you go under contract prior to July 1, this form stays into effect. You don't need to give them the new form that states go to this site, because that other site will have the 5 additional protected categories and the different required and not required disclosures. But this works. If you have a listing you take now and you are not under, if you're not under contract by end of June 30th, then you need to replace the disclosure form with the new one. Do you understand what I'm saying? Anyone have a problem with that? So as long as you're under contract, the old law is in effect. If you're not, July 1st, the new law is in effect. Replace it with the new form, get the owner to sign a new one. Okay. It might not hurt if you're representing a buyer. It might not hurt to start going over with them the things we talked about in the past about all the different new things that are going to be added for disclosure in Virginia. Okay. The statement has a link which the buyer can make a more knowledgeable decision about purchasing a property, and it contains both disclosures and disclaimers. So in Virginia, there will be like 14. I'm not telling you I have these, buyer. You need to find it out. There will still be 5 affirmative disclosures on this site. The 5 things that you must go over with, if you're an owner, 5 things you must disclose. And we'll take a look at that in a second here. Okay. And it has a disclosures webpage site. It may have a different site on the form before July 1st and after, because the old law is in effect. They usually just give it a different website. So make sure they're getting to the right one depending on the timing of your contract. So the first disclosure on the site, the owner states that the property and all improvements are being sold as is, thus disclaiming any warranties or representations as to the condition of the property or its improvements. In Virginia, we are a caveat emptor state. The seller does not have to tell the buyer anything about their property except for the 5 mandatory disclosures. They cannot hide it. So if I know my property has mold, I don't have to tell you my property has mold. But if I cover it up intentionally so you can't find it and you find it later, then that's a different story. Now, if you are a licensed agent, okay, you are a licensed agent and you are selling a property, you have a double whammy. You don't have the protections of caveat emptor when it comes to your own property per se, because as an agent, you have a duty to disclose any known material adverse fact about the physical structure and the property inside the property line. So you have a higher duty when you are the seller, okay? So don't try to hide behind this law. Remember, it's a known material adverse fact, not defect in the property. So if you know something about a property, the physical structure of the property that would prevent the buyer from making a decision to buy if they knew because they found it to be adverse, then you need to, at that point, still disclose as an owner if you're an agent. So don't try to hide behind this law as an owner. Any questions about that? Since you're licensed, you're bound by the agency statute. You're held to a higher standard.
So this will be only for the agent selling their own property, right? Not the.
If you're selling a property that you own, okay, and you know of a known material adverse fact, you have to tell. If it's just a regular seller, not a licensee, and they know a known material adverse fact about their property, unless it's one of the 5 mandatory disclosures, they do not have to tell.
Okay.
Because the adverse fact is a agency statute. Okay, so unless they're an agent, they're not bound by that. The safest avenue is just tell the truth about your property, but you know, every seller may not do that. So once that seller tells you an adverse fact about their property, even though they don't have to disclose, you do because of our agency statute. Does that make sense? And once a problem has been professionally taken care of, there's receipts. It was a licensed bonded contractor that completely took care of the problem. Then there's nothing for the seller to disclose anymore about their property, okay, or you. Okay, and I think we've used the example in the past, the roof. I've had my roof repaired 7 times already this year. I've had to have a roofer in 7 times for different problems with my roof, okay? As a seller, is that something you have to tell? No, it's not. I mean, it's not one of the 5 mandatory. As an agent, the sellers told you they've had their roof repaired 7 times this year. Is that a known material adverse fact? Would you disclose that to buyers?
No.
So,
No.
So some people are saying no. I'm saying I would, because it's a fact, not a defect. Okay, the roof leaking is a defect, but ask yourself, if you was a buyer, you know that roof had been replaced 7 times. I mean, that roof had leaked 7 times this year. Would that affect your decision to buy the property?
Yes.
Okay, so if you answer yes, then you've answered your own question. That's a known material adverse fact about the physical structure. If you were the buyer and you knew the roof had leaked 7 times, what might you want in your sales contract?
Roof replaced.
Okay, so now, you know, the owner doesn't have to tell, but I think as an agent, you better tell, because they're going to come back and haunt you, because there's not a judge in the world that would not rule that that's not a known material adverse fact, in my opinion. Okay, so it's a difference between a licensee and a seller, and a licensee who is the seller. You have a different standard. Okay, so number 1 goes on. This includes the existence of any covenants and restrictions that could affect the property or improvements. The statement advises the buyer to use whatever due diligence the buyer thinks necessary, including home and other inspections or examinations as specified in the purchase contract, to determine the condition of the property. And all inspections have to be, it says, prior to settlement in the law, but you know they have to be done prior to expiration of the terms in the contract. And so that's why they came up with this adverse condition consequences form for things like paragraph 1 there. Okay, the second one. Our statute says property line in, okay? not outside the property line. So what this number 2 is saying, the owner makes no representations about any property that may be adjacent, including zoning or permitted uses of adjacent parcels. The buyer has the responsibility to check all that out themselves and use whatever due diligence the buyer deems necessary to satisfy those requirements. So that's why I think it's imperative that you start incorporating this form in your packages when you meet with the seller and with the buyer. Have it initialed off, and then that way you can prove that you've gone over this stuff with them. These 2 initial disclaimers are then followed by a series of declarations. If you look at the page 2 of 3, historic district. So under adverse consequences, under other, if they're buying a house in the city of Alexandria and they were planning on making changes to the property, can they just do that? Even windows or any of that other stuff? No, because historic district ordinances won't allow you to change the exterior unless it's for under fair housing. It would be discrimination not allowed them to allow me to put the ramps and whatever. Other than that, they buying a house in a historic district, then there's going to be an effect on it. Resource protection areas that might have been created by an ordinance implementing the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. I had some property down on the Potomac River at one time that we sold, that my father and I owned together with my mother, and it was in a resource protection area, and they couldn't build on a certain part of the property, et cetera, and we had to find the perfect purchaser for that knew how to do it. Where it might affect you, all the area that we work in is bound by the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. If there is any water, any running water, like a creek, little stream, whatever, within 100 feet of the property, you can't build in that area. You couldn't even put a deck up. So they need to understand Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, but it's saying here, the owner's not telling them about this stuff. You need to check it out. Sex offenders, dam break inundation zone, presence of any stormwater detention facilities. And that one is being moved into the mandatory disclosures and out of the, I'm not telling you, okay? And they're removing Chinese drywall, defective drywall from a one-page disclosure into this, you need to check it out section. So that all changes on July 1. Solar energy collection devices, special flood hazard areas. We have had 1 or 2 cases where people bought property and then couldn't do what they wanted because it was in a flood hazard area. Look, before you write any contract, you've heard me preach RPR. If you're not using NAR, RPR, do so. Set yourself up today. Go to NARRPR.com. You need your NERDS number, your national ID number. You need your number for Bright, and you need your email. You can do a market analysis on anywhere in the United States on any property, residential or commercial, in a matter of 3 to 5 minutes. You can have a 30-page report. And we discussed all that. We can always do a session on that if you want. But part of that, if you pull up a property report and you go to something we call heat maps, HEAT, you can hit flood hazard area. It will superimpose the floodplain right over the house. You can know in 3 minutes whether a property is in a floodplain. There's no reason to write a contract for a buyer on a piece of property that's in a flood zone until they know the consequences of it. Also, conservation or other easements, and whether it's in a community development. These are the mandatories. There will now be one for lead pipes for drinking water. We went over all these new ones that will be added. Okay, it goes. So you need to check out whatever you need to check out zoning maps, flood certifications, sex offender registry, put them on notice to do that. Now, there are 5 affirmative disclosures in Virginia that we were bound by. The first one was not, it's for builders of a new property, but if you are representing a builder that's building new property, then you need to know that they have their own residential property disclosure form for new property. And we're not in planning District 15, so that did not affect us. However, we talked about military aircraft, but that's only down in the Hampton Roads region, so we probably wouldn't use that one much. But if you go outside of your market area, and I know some agents, a couple of our offices approached me about, can they sell down in Virginia Beach in that area? They had somebody, yes, but be aware of this military aircraft, okay? Now, disclosure for defective drywall, that is still a disclosure on a 1-page disclosure form until July 1st. After that, it moves over into, I'm not telling you I have these. And then we've talked in length about this one. You received a written notice of a pending code or zoning ordinance violation, and the law also says statewide building code. So under paragraph 20 of the sales contract, it says written notice or of a violation of zoning, etc. So if they've actually received that written notice, there's a 1-page disclosure form. The next one on page 3 of 3 is manufacture of methamphetamines. If the owner has used it for meth, then there's a 1-page disclosure form. And then if you are living in the property under a septic system waiver, then you must disclose. DPOR has a 1-page disclosure form for each one of those. You can find it in Instanet or on NVAR site. If you need them, you can find the forms there, okay? Just be aware if the owner has one of those, they have to do it. Now it goes over, the owner must provide, now I'm on the 3rd page of this disclosure form, if you have it there in front of you, K1346. So the owner must provide the buyer with the completed signed statement prior to contract ratification. So if technically you're supposed to hand the documents to them and all this stuff 3 days prior, and they had 3 days. Since that doesn't happen, then the law is 3 days after delivery, the statement is delivered in person. Remember, beginning July 1st, if all parties agree in writing, you can change that 3 days up to 7 days. You can't make it less, but you can increase it from 3 to 7. I'm probably going to ask for the 7 days for my buyer clients because it's just so much to read in a 3-day period. But once again, if it's a multi-contract presentation, you may not be able to get the additional 4 days. Okay, it's not automatic. It has to be written in the contract. If it's mailed, it's 5 days after postmark at settlement, because once you settle, you've waived the right to receive the documents. So you can go through and read that type of thing. Now, what happens if you don't deliver this POA to the people? Well, the law says, look, the seller has to deliver it. But if you don't receive it prior to settlement, okay, then all the way up to the time I actually receive these disclosures, okay, for this, not POA and condo, but this is for the property condition. I'm sorry about that. I have the right to void my contract, okay? And that's in the contract, the paragraph. If I don't receive this prior, then after I receive it, I have the right to void the contract all the way up till settlement, right? But once I settle, it's pretty much going to be over. Okay. And that's just a form to protect yourself, understanding your rights under the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act, condition of the property. Any questions about any of that? Read through the form. If you have questions about it, ask us. We'll be glad to make sure you understand. But make sure your buyers and sellers understand. I use this with buyers and sellers. Okay. Any questions about anything?
Yes, Larry. Regarding land, like I have a client who want to list a house he had and then he turned it down. It's a land now. So what kind of document should I use for?
You still use this because it's for land also.
Okay.
I would still use this because you could build 1 to 4 units on it.
And what about listing agreement? Same listing agreement we use?
If you're just going to sell it as land, no. I would use a land listing agreement.
A land listing agreement. And is there anything different you do when you list a land? I never listed a land before, so.
Well, you just make sure they understand that you're going to have some of these study periods, et cetera, to make sure they can do what they want. So you might want to check that out prior. They tore the house down?
Yes, he did already.
Okay, so, yeah. So see what restrictions they have on the footprint and how much they can build. But I would also check that floodplain to make sure something can be rebuilt.
Okay. That will be in the county, right?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Larry,
Okay. Who's speak? Yes.
this is Gulati, Prem Gulati.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. I have a contract. The buyer is buying a house, but this is occupied by the owner, and he's worried about they're not going to be vacate the house. Not vacate the house before the settlement. I said, just go by the contract. We will see, what they can do, because
Right.
he's buying another house, so he should not be worried as long as it's in the contract, right?
Correct. I mean, if they don't settle, if they don't move out, then you have to treat it as tenants by the, you have to go to court and try to get them out. And right now is a moratorium until June 28th of evicting anybody. But hopefully they
June
would just
28th.
honor that. Yeah. Yeah. The
June
Supreme
28th,
Court,
they cannot vacate.
you can't get an eviction right now until June 28th in the state of Virginia at the earliest.
Okay.
The Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Virginia Supreme Court issued a statewide moratorium on all eviction hearings through June 28th of 2020 because of coronavirus.
So
How much
unless
does-
it's change it, unless
Huh?
it's change it, right now.
It's not going to change. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said all courts, he controls it. All courts, you can't hold an eviction hearing for anybody until June 28th, 2020 at the earliest.
Larry, how much does it cost for eviction and all that, like court thing? Say if some tenant is not moving out and the seller has sold the house and the lease agreement is still on the property.
I don't know
So-
that one. That one I
You don't
don't know. And you have to check with, some of the managers and see if they've had to do it. I've never had to do it.
How many
Yeah, the only
months does
thing-
it take?
Huh?
How
Well, it
many
could
months
take-
once you put in
could-
application?
It could take it usually takes at least a month, I think. I'd have to go back and review the dates. They have specific dates. This have to be delivered. This have to be delivered, etc. So I'd have to double check on that. I'm not sure.
Larry,
Yes.
this is a good until July 20th for the closing. So he should be okay after
He
July
should, yeah,
20,
yeah.
June
I mean,
20th, right?
generally, so he's worried about who will get out. The one where he's buying.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
seller will not get out. I say he will get out, that's why he
Yeah,
signed
they-
for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they usually get out, but there's nothing that says, and right now that's why we did that COVID-19 addendum.
Yeah, I
so
did.
in case that happened. So yeah. They usually get out. There's no sense worrying
Yeah.
about a problem until it becomes one.
Yeah. And inspection, whatever is his inspection defect, he cannot go beyond this inspection report. Am I right? The buyer.
What about the inspection report? What is it?
Inspection report says that these things need to be, fixed. So he cannot go out of report, right?
Well, so if the report showed things worked at settlement,
Hmm.
okay, I mean at the home inspection, they still have to work a settlement. So if something else breaks that would work, the owner's going to have to fix it.
Right.
But other than that, no, they have to go by the report.
According to the report,
Right.
Okay.
L-
Yeah, that's
Larry,
what-
one question. So if home inspection doesn't have a fan not working, or say gas burner, one of the burner not working, and at the day of walkthrough, if you find that out and it's not in the home inspection report, so can you put it in the walkthrough form that it's
Yeah.
not working and give us something?
Yes.
Or
Yes, because it says on anything that works as of that time or anything they agreed to fix must still work. So if something else breaks between the home inspection and settlement, the owner is responsible. But if you're going to get over an argument over a burner, okay, and the owner says, no, I'm not going to fix it. Well, the buyer can't refuse to settle. That'd be something you'd have to go back later and sue. So at that point they have to decide if it's worth it or not. But technically, yes, the owner is responsible for fixing it.
what about the nails and when they remove the frames, and sometimes they leave the like TV mounts,
That's in the contract.
they remove and then everything.
The TV mount
If they
has to
don't put it.
remain. The TV mount has to remain with the property as part of our contract. They can take the TV, but not the TV mount.
Okay.
So if you want to take the TV mount, you have to put in the seller has to counter our contract that they're taking it. If they do that, then you want to counter that they have to have the damage repaired. But it's in our sales contract under items that convey. It says all electronic devices that are attached do not convey, but all brackets must remain. Any other questions?
Larry, this is Ahmed again.
Uh-huh.
I'm putting an offer in a condo where is more than 50% owned by investors. So the listing agent said you can only apply with a portfolio loan.
Uh-huh.
Familiar with that? Like, is there a specific list who does portfolio loans to recommend to my client?
You have to find a bank, and it's usually a community type bank that holds on to the loans. It won't be sold in the secondary market. So a portfolio lender is anybody that holds on to their loans, and it's usually a higher interest rate for doing that.
Should I recommend that to my client, or it's not advisable?
It's not advisable.
Okay.
Because if they go to sell in the future, they're going to run into the same problem.
Okay. Unless that investor sells some of his stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Larry,
But a portfolio lender is, it might be in some kind of investment trust fund that's making direct loans, et cetera. But it's very limited amount of people that you can get the loans from. Generally carries a higher interest rate.
Does it apply to lease land also, like the one in Arlington, Roslyn area, the cooperative properties?
The co-ops are different. Co-op, you're buying stock, you're not buying property. So there's very few banks that will do a co-op loan, and that the co-op itself usually has, the lenders that you can pretty much get the loan from. But they're lending on stock. They're not lending on the physical property, because you never own the property. You only own the right to occupy the property because you bought stock.
It's like a lease land, right? Mm-hmm.
I don't know the particular ones. River Place is the one I'm really familiar with.
Yes, that's that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So River Place, the other problem you have is that's on a land lease, and that land lease comes due, and unless they can renew it, or somehow they overcome it, all that converts back to the person who has the land lease. So
Larry, I got a question very quick.
So like in Maryland with land lease, it's different. You have the right to negotiate to buy the land lease, but Virginia doesn't have that. So be careful with that one.
Okay.
Okay. The inspection. Hello?
Yeah.
My question is, when ratify the contract, suppose we ratify today, we don't count that day, right? We count from tomorrow. Am I right? Calendar days?
It says the first day begins the day after received. Okay, so if you deliver it, the first day starts the following day in accordance with definitions
Following
in
day.
the contract.
7
Okay.
day, calendar days. Am I right?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
unless it says business days. So the contract
Bus-
says calendar days unless otherwise specified. So like the earnest Monday deposits, 3 business banking days. But if it doesn't say that, then it's a calendar day.
So, okay, calendar days, including everything, Saturday, Sunday, including 7
Yes,
calendar days. Yeah,
unless
okay.
unless the contract specifically says different.
Business, okay. I got it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Hi, Larry. Hi, Larry.
Yeah.
This is how you doing?
I'm excellent. You?
Fine, thank you. I have a question about the home inspection.
Uh-huh.
Okay, what happened? I'm the listing agent. What happened is the budget agent send the addendum, the ICRA, and doesn't send the home inspection report.
Well, then they've messed up because it says they have to send a home inspection report too. But, you know, did you call them and tell them, ask them why you hadn't received a home inspection report?
The seller asked me about the report. I say, okay, they need to send us the report. We need to wait until, I wait until the day of the home inspection deadline, and I still waiting for the report. Yeah.
Yes. Did they send a list over stuff they wanted fixed?
Yeah, they send everything. Yeah, except the report.
Well, did you contact the agent and tell them they had to send you the report?
No.
Unless your seller wants to play a game and see if they can get it, force them to do it without fixing stuff. I would ask for the report just to be above board.
Okay.
Is your seller willing to do any of the stuff?
Yeah, he wanna do the stuff. He wants to sell the house.
If they sign the addendum and send it back, then it didn't matter if they didn't receive the report. But as a seller, before I did it, I'd want to see the report. And the home inspection addendum says, if you fail to do any of these things, then you probably lost your right. So, but they don't want to get in an argument. They want to sell their house. I would probably go ahead and say, look, according to the contract, we haven't received a report yet. When are we going to get it?
Okay.
But so that way your seller knows exactly what the report said had to be done.
Yeah, because he said, okay, I'm gonna repair the item because I want to sell my house. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask this.
He should still see the copy of the report. But I mean, if he signs that addendum and sends it back, then everything is okay. Then the contingency doesn't sunset because you negotiated it. Yeah.
Okay. And the other question that I have is about the termites. I have another property that is listing, and the report say the house need treatment for termites. And the seller say, okay, I'm gonna repair, I'm gonna treat. And what happened if the buyer wants to go? The buyer wants to go out for the termites.
The buyer
says he's scared because the house has termites. I say, okay.
So they want to avoid the contract for that?
They say they're scared. Maybe they thinking to void the contract. I say no, because the seller is gonna treat. It's only $500.
Yeah,
It's small in the garage. It's a piece of goods that the termite company is gonna treat. I don't know what is the reason. Yeah,
No, they don't have the right to void under termite.
They can.
They should get legal advice if they're going to try to get out of a contract for termite, because they're going to be in default come settlement time, because the sellers performing what they were supposed to do under the contract. So there's no breach or default on the part of the seller. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Larry.
And termites don't eat that much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for 80. 80. Yeah. It's for 80. It's not too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Larry, I got a question.
Okay.
Very quick, go back to inspection. Buyer's agent can send the report to the seller's agent inspection report, copy of the inspection report. Is it right to seller? Send it?
They can send it, but technically the contract says it has to be delivered to the seller directly. But if it goes to their agent, the agent
but
should get it to them.
I can send it to my seller agent,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay. Legal, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay, well, good. Then we'll do this again next Wednesday. I'll probably be doing it actually from the Tyson's office next Wednesday, so you won't be looking at my condo here.